Let's talk supply chain. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Talk Supply Chain. Before we begin, as always, I have a question for you. So, the adoption of multi-cloud applications is rapidly accelerating, driven in part by the rise of AI. So, according to a Forbes survey, what percentage of respondents anticipate that the arrival of AI services will increase the demand for multi-cloud networking? What do you think? Well, let me know your guesses over on social and keep listening because I'll let you know at the end of the show. So today I'm joined by a brand with customers in more than 200 countries and territories. They're trusted to help drive growth and solve critical business problems. Who are they? Well, it's Google Cloud. Google Cloud accelerates every organization's ability to digitally transform its business and industry. They deliver enterprise-grade solutions that leverage Google's cutting-edge technology and tools that help developers build more sustainably. And today I'm joined, and I'm so excited, finally back on the show, Paula Natoli, Director of Global Strategic Industries, Supply Chain and Logistics. She's a passionate and energetic leader dedicated to transforming supply chains through cloud technology, data-driven insights, and AI innovation. Paula's career has focused on the powerful synergy between supply chain and technology, built upon her years of experience in various supply chain tech roles, from product management to industry strategy. And today we're going to be talking all about the challenges and opportunities across the supply chain in 2026. We're also going to shine a light on what's really happening with AI and data in the modern supply chain, and we'll be looking to the future to share the next big trends and what teams can do differently now to build a better tomorrow. So, welcome to the show, Paula.
Oh, awesome. It's so great to be here, Sarah. I know it's been a few years, so I'm so glad we finally got this scheduled and ready to go.
Yes, and we have so much to talk about. And this is just a bit of a preview of seeing us together. And I can't let the cat out of the bag just yet, but people are going to see us together a little bit more, I think, in the future. So I'm happy to have you here now. We had Stephen on the show back in December, and we had a great conversation about Google Cloud, how its technology helps run Google's own supply chain operations. Now, that was episode 507. If anyone missed it, go and check it out on the Let's Talk Supply Chain YouTube. It's also on letstalksupplychain.com. So I'm really looking forward to diving even deeper with you today. You and I have had many conversations over even the last, I think, 18 months about supply chain and how you're thinking about supply chain and what Google's role is within that. So before we dive into all of that, can you just introduce yourself a little bit more, share your background, because you have decades of experience and you've spent more than 20 years of that at Blue Yonder, which are also good friends of the show. So take us on that journey.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's scary when you start talking decades, Sarah. But yes, I was doing my own calculations, and it's a little bit scary when you can calculate that you've spent more than half of your life in the industry. So it's actually closer to 60% of my life. I've been trying to drive solutions at the intersection of supply chain and technology. But, my story started as an undergrad at Penn State University. Yay! Go Nittany Lions. But there is where I discovered this whole thing about supply chain. Back in the 1990s, it was I was majoring in business logistics back then. So it was even before we talked about supply chain, right? The term was a little bit different. But that sparked my interest, and I continued down that path. Kicked off my career at a small supply chain company called Manugistics, if anybody remembers that name, back in the 1990s. And, continued on trying to find that perfect fit between supply chain and technology. So, like you said, decades in here, and we're still here fighting the good fight, right? Aren't we, Sarah?
I am so with you. I mean, I'm decades in too. So if we're going to put it out there, I'm just going to join you on that bandwagon, because I think I started as reception in 1998 at the logistics company. So it's been a long time. You and I have been fighting the good fight for a very long time,
Yeah.
alongside some pretty other amazing supply chain leaders and things like that. So let's talk a little bit about leading that strategy, how you're doing it, because you lead supply chain and logistics strategy for Google Cloud's
Yeah.
customers. So, what do you think is the single biggest mindset shift that supply chain leaders need to make this year to stay ahead of the curve? And I think, and I could be wrong, I don't know how you feel about this, but I almost feel like 2026 is the year. Like it's the important year
Yeah.
that we really need to make bigger strides in what we're doing.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely going to happen, Sarah. So, and what's great is in my role here at Google Cloud is I get to work with companies across the globe, across industries to figure out how to use the great technology in Google Cloud to solve a supply chain problem. So
Right.
now we're thinking about things, broadly and taking this great technology that you and I are used to using in our everyday lives nowadays and applying it into the world of enterprise supply chain as well. But to your point, I think 2026 is indeed going to be a little bit of a pivot point and a turning point. And I think part of that is starting with the underlying foundation and mantra of, think back to the decades ago, Sarah, right? Our brains as supply chain people were inherently wired to solve for least cost.
Right.
Right. I mean, that's what we were, right? We were a
Yeah.
cost center. And frankly, you kind of knew that based upon where in a organization the supply chain team sat. The first implementation work that I did in the 1990s, we were in a trailer outside of the corporate headquarters, right?
No, you were not.
Oh, we were. I was either there or in the basement, no windows. But now that's all changed, right? But the
No
good thing
windows.
is, no windows. I know.
And now
I
we've got a
know.
seat at the table, right? I think
Now we got to see it.
Coca-Cola just announced their next, CEO is going to be a supply chain person. So I cannot believe we've gone from that, what you're talking about in trailers in the back lot to now being
Yeah,
front and center. I mean, sorry to interrupt. I just thought that was such an awesome way to think about, the strides that we've made.
it's exactly right. And so, but now it's to your point, it's not just the cost center mentality, right? We're moving away from saying, how do I make this cheaper? How do I move it cheaper? How do I just sell it for more, right? And we're shifting that to say within the supply chain space, we're broadening that, right? It's how can I expedite fulfillment speed, or how can I expand levels of transparency and the visibility to capture more market share? So I think it becomes an underlying mindset shift that's definitely exploded into a new foundational element, which gets us away from this kind of traditional siloed thinking and approach and moving us into more of a value creation model. And I think that sets the stage for everything else we're going to be doing going forward.
Well, and I think you're right. And I love to hear that we're going to break down silos. Like, honestly, I said to somebody the other day, I couldn't believe I was in 2025 still talking about silos. And, I've been mentioning collaboration is the future of business, I think, ever since I started the podcast. And I think we're slowly getting there. But you're right. I never really thought about it this way in traditional supply chain. And for those of us who have grown up in supply chain and sort of seen this evolution that we're talking about over the last couple of years, it's crazy to think about how we were so structured as supply chain professionals to problem solve, but also to figure out how we get the costs out of there and not be such a burden on the organization, right? And now we have to change that thinking around. And I think there's a seismic shift because you've got those professionals who have grown up in that sort of environment. And then you've got the next wave of professionals who are coming in that have not been locked into that mindset. And so it's really about finding that balance between the two that's really going to be the magic that's going to set supply chains apart moving forward and help keep them resilient. Now, I want to talk about that because the industry really has been focused on building resilient supply chains for years. The pandemic showed that, right? But I think in 2026, resilience is now table stakes. What do you think is the next frontier for competitive advantage? Like, how are you guiding leaders to think beyond just surviving the disruptions?
Yeah, and that goes a little bit, even ties into the prior conversation that we're having, right? Is the move from just efficiency to overall agility becomes key. And that's going to serve as this foundation of exactly what you're talking about, from not just a level of resiliency. It's that becomes table stakes. We've all learned that over the past 5 years. So now it's moving kind of to the next level in saying, how do I now take all of that and not just be resilient to something when it happens, but turning that into a combination of intelligence and automation. We keep using the term now, autonomous supply chain,
Right.
but there is definitely a level with that. Is I don't want to just bounce back from a disruption when it happens, but I need the ability to anticipate it before it's going to happen, and then have my corresponding solutions and resolutions moving as that fast follower as well. So it becomes honestly like a different fabric in the underpinning. And frankly, technology is going to play a big role in that.
Yeah, I was just writing down the word anticipate. Because a lot of times we use the word proactive. So counterintuitive to being reactive, we're using the word proactive. But I think that word sometimes hits right, but sometimes doesn't hit right, because there's a level of disruption that we don't actually know is possible or could potentially happen down the road. And I use the pandemic as an example because nobody saw that coming. Right. And so I think your word anticipate is so much more powerful than being proactive, because there's still some unknown out there that we can't necessarily drive that proactiveness through, but we could potentially anticipate it to a certain level and be able to pivot for the rest. So even if we anticipate it at 60%, we've got 40% to close that gap. At least we're not 100% reactive, right?
Right. And I think it ties into like the concept of having like a sensory grid, right? We need to go out there. We have all of our senses. How are we out there sensing to be able to anticipate something as to a response, right? And that starts to get us into, okay, I kind of gave the alluding into the technology.
Yeah.
If I can sense the potential and anticipate these, well, now I need the technology to run those scenarios to help me determine, well, what if this, what if that? But yeah, I think it's definitely more of an anticipation type of an approach.
Yeah. So let's talk about the technology. I mean, right now we have more data than ever, right? But I also think that many companies are struggling to turn it into action. So I talk about data all the time. Companies come on and they talk about the quality of data. They talk about the amounts of data. They talk about the data that we need to be able to make the decisions. And so there's so many things around data. Why do you think this gap exists, and how does Google Cloud really help to bridge that gap?
You are spot on. We're not really short of data. We have a lot of it.
Right.
And if you now look at all I use that term about sensing. Now we're capturing data at crazy amounts than we ever have before, right? We're storing it at crazy amounts as we ever had before. But to your point, as overall organizations, we still haven't fully unlocked the value associated with that. So why is that? Probably a couple of different reasons. One, you mentioned this earlier, Sarah, we still have data silos, right? And if you look at traditionally in the supply chain space, we all have invested in levels of best of breed solutions to operate our planning solutions, our manufacturing solutions, our warehousing, our transportation, our S&OP, you name it. We have solutions that do amazing work. The value is, how do I start to now pull all of that out of those individual silos and capitalize upon that, connecting that tissue together? So we have those silos first and foremost, but remember, it's also not just our own internal data. We have external data, right? We have community data from our suppliers or from our logistics providers. We have external information such as customer demographics, buying behaviors. We have search trends. We have weather, all of that. So it's a matter of how do we pull all of that together to be able to unlock those next levels of insights. So to your point, I think data silos are still a challenge for all of us.
Mhm.
I think data quality still becomes a challenge. Where I know we're going to probably talk a little bit about AI that everyone is excited about, but remember that AI is only as good as the data that is going to be able to feed it. So we still have that type of challenge as well.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's tooling. How do we actually have accessible tools to be able to tap into all of this data? So I think it comes from a couple of different directions, in my opinion.
Well, yeah. And I think it also takes a certain level of knowledge to be able to manage all of this and really understand what it is that you're looking, what are the outcomes that we want that data to help drive?
Yeah.
What are the decisions that we want it to help us to be able to make, right? Can we get two or three different options? And then we can assess the risk that goes along with it and where we're comfortable sort of spending that risk. So I think there's still a lot of questions out there as to who's going to do it, how are we going to invest in it, right? There's a lot of different things to be able to juggle. And also supply chains, they're big and they're complex, and we sort of have to take it one step at a time to figure out where it makes the most sense too. And I think a layer on top of that is sustainability. Now, I talked about this in a LinkedIn Live just the other day, and how, sustainability was kind of waning in 25. Now it's making a bit more of a comeback. It's more at the forefront. Customers and industry are demanding more sustainable supply chains. How do you see the role of technology, specifically AI and data, in helping companies meet these aggressive sustainability goals?
Yeah. And Sarah, that ties perfectly into the prior question, because we do need to operate in that level of having a unified data platform, right? And that's the starting point of also where Google Cloud will start to play, is pulling together internal, external data, coupling that with your suppliers' data. And we start talking about end-tier suppliers and things of that nature. So we want to look at it through the lens of having that unified data platform to start. So to your point, sustainability initiatives really dovetail into that. When we start to look at these really complex supply chains, we talked earlier, the amount of data is crazy, right? And now we layer in levels of sustainability. So technology is going to be the underpinning area by which we're going to be able to pull all of that together, and be able to look at things as not just being, you mentioned earlier, a resilient supply chain, but also a sustainable supply chain. So first and foremost is on the data and capitalizing upon that. Second, you kind of mentioned on the AI side of the house.
Mhm.
This gets into, well, how do I now start to anticipate? Am I going to have challenges with some of my suppliers? Do they not adhere to my sustainability initiatives and goals and requirements that might come into play? How do I now utilize AI to identify those, to come up with levels of potential solutions? Should I be sourcing something a little bit differently? What does that then mean to my cost and transportation? And so basically, I need to kind of fold sustainability as an integral part of everything that I do, and not just as a after the fact type of calculation. So
Yeah.
in that regards, Sarah, I think it's not necessarily a trade-off, right? So much of what we do in the supply chain space also, if we optimize something, let's say for last mile delivery, that's likely the least cost option to eliminate empty miles. And it's also the most sustainable initiative, right? So we kind of hopefully aren't doing a bunch of different trade-offs.
Yeah, I chuckled because you and I are on the same page. I literally just wrote, it's not an either or.
Yeah,
And
look
you
at that.
said
Look at that.
trade-offs.
Yes. Yeah. But to your point, it goes back to before. We're not just a cost center. Things aren't either or. We have a plethora of things that we need to be able to take into account, and sustainability is one of those.
Yeah, yeah. And it's super important. I think one of the stats that was shared within that LinkedIn Live was 70% of consumers are really leaning on the retailers of where they're purchasing their product to make sure that they are keeping sustainability at the forefront. And that's
Yeah.
still like that's a fairly big number. And I think most people would be surprised at that today because it did look like it was waning. But it shows that it's still top of mind and really important. So I want to talk to you about your own global supply chain because Google Cloud powers Google's own global supply chain. And so as a supply chain and logistics leader, how does that inform conversations that you have with customers who want to make their operations more resilient, efficient, sustainable? Talk to me about that because that's got to be a fairly interesting conversation because you're almost testing it out on your own before you're taking it out to customers.
Exactly. And that's actually what makes it so much fun being part of the broader Google and Alphabet is we run and operate our own supply chains, very big, very global, very complex. As you mentioned, you had Stephen on prior, he's living this daily as being a supply chain professional as part of Google. My role is I need to be able to take the technology in Google Cloud and use it to even power our own supply chains. So to your point, it's, I have customer zero right in my same organizational structure. Right. So I look at that as it establishes a level of proven solutions. It establishes a level of credibility where I'm not just saying, hey, look at all this cool stuff you can do with our technology, but rather we can flip it and bring someone like Stephen in and say, here's exactly how I solved a problem in my supply chain, utilizing Google Cloud technology, utilizing some of our partner technology, and building an entire ecosystem that solves that complex challenge. So it's kind of cool to have a customer zero. In my product management background, always finding that first customer isn't always the easiest thing. Right. So it's great that I have it a little bit pre-built directly within my organization.
Well, yeah, and you're putting your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
And that's one of the things that is going to set you apart as, a supply chain partner to a lot of organizations within the industry is the fact that you have literally created your own testing environment. And by the time that it comes to me as the potential customer, I know that you have tested all sorts of things. And of course, there's going to be others that come up because every supply chain is very unique, right? But for the fundamentals, you've already tested that out. You've removed the bugs. What and it's working in real time for you before you're even giving it to them.
Exactly.
And I love that. All right. So many cloud providers, they offer logistics solutions. And so I do want to ask you how Google Cloud's approach is fundamentally different for companies dealing with immense complexity, multiple geographies, diverse product portfolios, unpredictable demand. I mean, you're probably dealing with that in your own as well. And so this should be a fairly easy question for you to really showcase what that looks like. We already talked about the differentiator being that you use it within your own supply chains before you take it to somebody else. So let's just expand on that.
Yeah, so I think really at its core, at Google Cloud, we're a data and AI company. So we can absolutely utilize that to solve supply chain problems, plus a plethora of other problems. Yeah. But I think one of the unique differentiators here too is as AI has grown and expanded so incredibly fast over the past couple of years, there's a lot of different components that go into making AI use cases actually happen, right? To make them viable. And at Google Cloud, we actually have an overall open, integrated, full stack platform solution as it relates to AI. And I think that's a little bit of a differentiator where we're not having, I need to take a little bit of this and a little bit of that. We're all, it's almost like going back to a little bit of the silo conversation, but through components that are necessary to run the AI of today and tomorrow. But if I were just to kind of frame that out a little bit, Sarah, to give you some insight, what Google offers here is that full integrated stack, starting all the way with the underlying foundational technology with TPUs, right? This is infrastructure. These are chips that are designed under Google itself to be focused specifically on optimizing how to run and process AI. So think about that as, how do I train the models? How do I do the inference? The chips themselves are designed. The data and analytics layer. So this is the whole unified data platform that we actually just started to talk about before. Then we have the kind of the overall research and the models. And I think that's when people think about AI, they think about the models, right? For us, that's the Gemini family of models that are built in. But because we also have an open platform, we can tap in and leverage other models that are being built out in the market as well. Above that is an overall platform. So now think about your data scientists and your developers that need a platform to build on that. So part of that is our Vertex AI platform. And then we're getting to the whole agent side of the conversation. So the agents and the apps, pre-built agents that go into that. So it's the full stack, Sarah. And that allows us to work with our customers to kind of get them at whatever level of maturity they are along their AI journey.
I love that. And I love that you really went into the different layers, because I think that's really important for us to understand fundamentally what goes into AI agents. For example, sometimes we get overwhelmed at the execution and the deliverable of the AI agent and what can it do for me. But then we might forget everything that goes into it and all of the data that needs to be procured and provided so that these AI agents can do successfully what they were meant to do. And there's several layers to that. And I think it's fascinating. And I appreciate you for sharing that. One of the things that you talked about was data scientists. Now, I want to ask you, because I'm hearing all too often that AI is only for data scientists, although I think that's changing a little bit. But I want to get a better understanding about how Google Cloud is making powerful AI and analytics tools like you were just talking about, but accessible to the everyday supply chain planner or logistics operator, like on the front lines. How are they specifically using this?
Yeah, and I think in general, there's this whole new level of really being able to democratize the AI. I'm not an overly technologist person, right? So I know enough to be dangerous. I think we all have over the years, but I'm not a data scientist. I'm not a developer. I'm not an engineer. But I tell you what, Sarah, I get my hands on some of this technology and I'm building my own agents.
Yes, you are.
So yeah, but and I love it, by the way, right? I like to get my hands dirty into that. But that goes to show even the creation of some of these, where put it this way, you get to use the AI tools to help you craft how to create an AI agent, right? So now think about generative AI coming in and doing things like vibe coding and things like that, where it becomes a lot more democratized, even in the creation, the development, the deployment. But the second thing I would say there too is it gets democratized because all of this AI is being injected into the tools and the technologies that supply chain professionals and frontline workers are using every day
anyways.
So it's, yeah, they're already into it. So it's the tools that they're using, that they know, that they operate with. And now all of that AI is just being embedded directly into that. So it becomes something at the fingertips of anybody, whether you're a demand planner, an inventory analyst, maybe you're a maintenance worker in a manufacturing plant, maybe you're the fleet operator. AI is at the fingertips of everybody, and it's not just for data scientists.
Yeah, I can tell you. So we work on the Google Workspace, and I've been using Gemini for quite a while. I actually just used it the other day to help me with some slides. And I know this isn't like every day for supply chain professionals, but the button that was beautify this slide, I was like, oh, this is fabulous.
Yeah. And so that leverages our nano banana model for image generation. It is amazing, right? So Sarah, but now think about that. If you are preparing for an SNOP monthly meeting, how much time do you spend in building slides to tell the story? So yes, it absolutely still goes into the hands of a supply chain professional.
Yeah. And I think it's also going to change the way that we ingest content. And that's not something that we're going to talk about today, but I think I just wanted to plant the seed because you're going to be hearing more about that going forward, actually, from both of us. So let's talk a little bit about the agentic AI. Because I think, agentic AI traditionally is around, faster insights, being able to put those insights into somebody's hands a lot faster. But I also think that it's fundamentally changing how supply chain teams interact with data and interacts with their systems. I mean, we just gave an example around beautifying a slide for a presentation, and knowing the power of that and that being so incredible, I can only imagine what this means. So talk to us about that.
Yeah. Well, and that's the new phase of everything AI is all around agentic AI. I look at this and say we're moving from a little bit more of a passive level to now executing things. So think about it this way. I might be able to say, what are my options on something? So maybe a shipment's late, something like that. What are my options? That's one phase. But now we're actually getting to the point of, okay, don't just tell me what my options are. Find the right option and execute it. So it becomes a little bit more from just being an operator to actually being the overall orchestration that kicks into high gear, right? So think about it in your daily environments of how many times you're firefighting, you're looking for solutions to problems. Now I'm going to have those little agents helping you out along the way who can not only surface the problems, find the solutions, that they can also execute upon them.
Yeah. And that's such an interesting model because everything that I talk about on this show, a lot of time the word trust comes up. But then at the same time, the word bias comes up as well. So in your first scenario where it's providing three different solutions or scenarios that I can choose from and decide which one is better, right? Versus the second scenario where it actually decides which one is better and executes. Yeah. So that's going to sort of shake a couple of people to the core because it really comes down to trust and bias. If you present those three solutions to somebody and they potentially have some bias somewhere in any of those solutions, they may or may not pick the right one. Whereas in your second scenario where AI is able to pick the right one and execute, actually takes the bias out of the equation, but you rock the trust of the person who's managing it, right? Because until it happens a few times and you can build that trust, they're going to be like, I don't know if I want it to do this or not. So it's really, this part of the conversation is super interesting to me because those two kind of work hand in hand, but you have to get through both to be able to get the success on the other side.
You're spot on with that. But think about it this way also. So you have options. Doesn't mean that an agent's going to take over and run everything, right? You're setting the guardrails, and in some situations you might have the human in the loop, et cetera. But just even consider going back to the early days of decision support. Just think demand forecasting, right? How much bias was put in when people would override a forecast and you're comparing it against the naive model, et cetera. It's the same type of thing of how do I build it up? How do I use it that is data-driven approach? And to your point, pull the bias out of it. So I think a battle we continue to fight in this space.
I think so too. And that brings me to another question around sort of the human involvement in all of that. Because if AI takes on more of the analytical heavy lifting, like we're talking about, how do you see the role of human supply chain professionals evolving? Like, what new skills do you think is going to be most valuable in 2026 and beyond? And to be honest with you, I get this question a lot. I get a lot of people reaching out to me on LinkedIn. They're like, I want to get into supply chain. What are the hard and soft skills that I need to sort of pursue before I can do that? So it's a really important question that a lot of people are asking.
Yeah, I get the same question a lot as well, Sarah. And as I go back and visit my alma mater, that's a big question I get from students. Hey, what other skills should I be looking at? But I think in general, with the newer technology and the tools that we're going to have at our fingertips, especially for these students coming into this, they're going to be used to using these tools and technologies in their everyday lives. They're going to want to be able to leverage the same things in an enterprise type of environment. But I think the key thing is here, we're moving beyond kind of just the broader data analyst type of skill sets to an overall strategic orchestrator, right?
Right.
The environment where supply chain professionals are setting the strategy, setting the guardrails, and determining the process by which agents will also run certain things, that becomes key.
Mm-hmm.
And I will always say, one of the things an agent's not going to be able to do is to storytell. That's my take. I still have to be able to talk about what's going on. Why do we need to do certain things? Why these suppliers are not filling into and hitting the OTIF levels? Why these shipments are late? I still have to be able to take all of that information and insight and set the strategy and tell the story. So I still see that as some key stuff as we move forward.
Well, and now let's sort of switch gears on the other side of things. What do you think is the number one piece of advice for C-suite leaders, chief supply chain officers who are committed? They want to build a truly AI-driven, future-ready supply chain.
Yeah.
What's your piece of advice for them? I don't want to ask you where they should start because I think people are starting. Like I think they've started. But I think it's the path of continuous improvement and not knowing what is going to happen in the future, because there's a lot of this tech that we don't even know the capabilities of that are going to be popping up over the next couple of years and beyond, right? So what advice would you have for them?
I think the biggest thing is differentiate between the what and the how, right? So everyone's focused on AI, and you better believe it's a conversation in all the boardrooms of how are we using AI? How are we doing this? And that's a technology conversation, right? I still have the problems that I'm battling in my supply chain. I still have those problems. Start with the business problem. What I now have are different tools in my toolbox to be able to address that problem with greater efficiency, greater accuracy, lower cost, higher margin, you name it. I now have different tools. And I think, especially for us in the supply chain space, everyone's talking AI, and what falls to the wayside? Oh, our traditional stuff, predictive AI or optimization models and stuff like that. We're not replacing everything here, right? The different tools, I need to use the right tool to solve the right problem, right? Even if I was a doctor, I use the right equipment to solve the right problem or do the right surgery, right? It's the same type of thing. So start with the business problem, figure out where can I start, to your point, but identify the business problem, what the business challenge is, what tools I can now apply to that, which likely can encompass some AI on top of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, I think prioritizing. I mean, no business has, one challenge that they're looking to solve for, right? It's usually
that would
multiple.
Be nice.
It's usually multiple. And so I think the other piece of that is the prioritization and also the reality of how long it's going to take to be able to figure out what solutions are on the market, figure out the right solution for you, implementation, onboarding, and then being able to get to the next one. And so I think there's this like sense of having to speed up and get everything right. Where there's also this moment of, wait a second, we need to slow down. We need to prioritize. We need to figure out what comes first.
Right. But all of that, to your point, we'll start to identify all these layers that we're talking about, right? What data do I need to solve that problem? What agents are going to be part of that, right? So I'm going to now start to layer those pieces in, and all of those layers then will start to expand as I layer another problem on another problem on another problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and it only makes sense too. I was thinking about this because we work in the Google environment as well, the Google workspace for a variety of different things. And if your team's already in that environment, that's a really, really great place to start in the fact that you've already got your data, most of your data, unless you're working on different systems for other things, all in one place that you can start to aggregate and use your platform and the tools available with Google Cloud. I mean, that's a low-hanging fruit, I think, for a lot of people, especially who are working within your workspace.
Agree.
So looking ahead, what do you think is the one emerging technology or trend that you believe will have the biggest impact on supply chains in the next 5 years?
It's tough to, I could give you the easy answer of AI, right? We all know that's going to be there, but maybe it's not necessarily just one technology. I think kind of our North Star is really getting to, I don't want to say a full, but some level of really reaching that goal of a level of an autonomous supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we do that? That's going to really be a mixture of technologies. So I'd say any of the technologies that are going to put us into that type of direction. So it will be AI, it will be IoT, it will be robotics, it will be autonomous vehicles, right? Any of those technologies, when we start to couple them together, are going to get us towards the North Star of being more autonomous in the supply chain space.
Yeah, collaboration, not only amongst stakeholders, internal, external, but collaboration amongst a lot of these technologies that are, being put in front of us and are giving us the opportunity to see what is possible in the industry. So if I was to ask you, what is one thing you want every listener of this podcast to do differently tomorrow to start building a better supply chain? It's kind of where we started this conversation, so it's a great place to end it. And I love this because, we're every day we are building the future of supply chains, and everybody has a role to play and makes an impact, whether it's small or large, every single day. So what do you think the one thing is?
I think it almost goes back to the beginning. Our mindsets are going to shift fundamentally, right? I think that's going to become key. And I think part of that is going to be moving away from that reactive to the proactive side, a little bit on the anticipation type of thing that we talked about in the beginning. So what does this really mean? This means fundamentally switching how we even ask questions about our supply chain and our performance. So getting away from, hey, how did we do last week? Right? You kind of that KPI metric, give me my metric to shifting to say something like, what are the top 3 risks to our plan for next month? And what data do we need to figure out and anticipate where our challenges might be?
Right.
It's a shift, right? It's a shift of a mindset. And now I have different tools and technology and data that are going to help me move towards that type of direction.
Yeah. And I also think all of this is going to bring out some vulnerability for some of the professionals that are taking a look at, the different tools that they're going to use, because they're going to have to ask different questions, not only of their teams, but they're going to have to ask different questions of themselves, right? To really build the trust and to take the bias out. And that, I think, is going to be a powerful tomorrow for the supply chain industry as well. So just wanted to throw that in. But you and I could talk about this all day long. We've done it before. We'll do it again.
I know.
And I've really enjoyed looking at both sides of the coin with you today, because both looking at, what the next frontier is for supply chain, but also thinking about what we can do now to make sure our businesses are actually ready. I mean, it's been such a great conversation. Now, did you have a guess at today's big question? At the top of the show, I asked you, according to a Forbes survey, what percentage of respondents anticipate that the arrival of AI services will increase the demand for multi-cloud networking? Paula, I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you know what it is? Do you want to take a guess?
I don't, but I'm going to assume it's pretty high.
Yes, it's a huge 82%. And this is another area in which Google Cloud is really leading the way. So if you want to discover more about how Google Cloud could help you transform your supply chain operations, head over to cloud.google.com to learn more. And I want to give a massive thanks to the team at Google Cloud for making this episode happen. Remember to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Check out more content from the best and the brightest over on letstalksupplychain.com. And if you missed the last Google Cloud episode 507, over there as well. And we've got the incredible guests, innovative strategies, and transformative solutions you can't afford to miss. So until next time, I'm Sarah Barnes-Humphrey. This is Let's Talk Supply Chain. And Paula, thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing such great insights on, supply chains now and supply chains of the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah.